Thank you for listening to this news brief, a short episode, and just kind of run through some of the news that's been kind of circulating through the last week. Thank you for listening to this coffee news, radio news update here at the Field Project. Part of our project is we're working on different types of radio shows, programming, just learning how to operate equipment off and on air, and then working out in, I guess I would say, freestyle radio, open mic. So you'll see a lot more of that coming this summer. Let's talk about some of the news stories that have been kind of out there, but just kind of updates. Well, we heard the conclusion that Anthony Weiner was sentenced to 2 years. The story has been out there for a while, so it's not like a news story, but this is kind of like an update. So we put together some of these images just so you can have a little theater, radio theater that is. I want to kind of skim through this stuff though. What I'm going to do is try to give you guys a different way of looking at news and maybe some body language per se, inferences, things that you might pick up from these images. And we'll start with the most important story of the week, of course, was the Manchester attack that occurred in Manchester, England at Ariana Grande's concert. You look at these images and people were running for their lives. And these people's lives have changed greatly. But then you look at this news story, which adds up to nothing but more of that spin. Katy Perry on Manchester bombing. No barriers, no borders. We just all need to coexist. And that is going to bring us to this image of Katy Perry, which we know she's not a Christian because she stated that she could not become Amy Grant. So she sold her soul. And what did she sell her soul? To Isis, the pagan goddess Isis. That's an interesting. Just keep that in the back of your mind. So then we're going to go to the other controversial story of the Seth Rich murder investigation, which is obviously, by looking at the body language and those involved, you can tell that this story is not going away. And we're just going to discuss the body language and just the attitudes and inferences. Now let's go to the Benjamin Netanyahu speech, President Trump. This was a very warm moment. You could tell by how they were engaging that they wanted to be there. Now, let's go to the next one. This was at the NATO speech, and you could see that this was a smug attitude between the NATO leaders, as if like, did you believe he just said that? Now, we've seen people do this before because we're going to discuss that more. We're going to leave it right there. Let's go on to the next story where Debbie Wasserman Schultz ordered the chief of police in Washington, D.C., the Metro Chief of Police, that is, and she said that there would be consequences because he didn't do what she asked him. Leave it there because we're going to discuss more. Let's go on to the next story. Another story that's been catching a lot of airtime is MS-13. As a result of not closing the borders, as a result of just freely letting people in with no regard of our immigration system. Because, you know, Canada has an immigration system. In fact, the people that complain about the border issue, they don't seem to understand. But anyone that wants to become a Canadian citizen, there's a 6-year waiting list. I mean, I talk about irony. The very people that want to leave the country who complain about all the issues, immigration, well, they want to go to Canada. And then they end up finding out that there's a 6-year waiting list. Now, the reason I listed all this information, because I wanted to go one by one, let's pick up with, well, we covered a little bit on the Manchester, England event that occurred at the Ariana Grande concert. What I found interesting is obviously this was a real devastating event. And even while this occurred, that there were celebrities coming out still supporting open borders. This is not what you want to be hearing after you've just experienced a horrific terror attack. In fact, I think it's meant to do it for a reason, so we'll leave it there. And you can add to it as you please, but what a way to really anger the people who've been directly or indirectly affected by terrorism is to come out and say something that's completely opposite of the message that people want to hear. And that was Katy Perry. And that was, many people have said that. And it seemed they overlooked the fact that these people just lost somebody. And it was done that way for a reason, because Katy Perry, she is not stupid. She knows what she's doing. And that's why I showed you that headline. Okay, so let's go to MS-13, because it's part of the issue that we're not only dealing with the issue of ISIS, what happened in Manchester, but here in the United States, it'll be MS-13 and the rapes and crimes that have been committed, and how ICE is trying to clean up this problem. In fact, if you look at the number of people who have been arrested, and what they have tried to do is stop the bleeding at the border. So that goes to the point why we're discussing Katy Perry. She's going to try to push that message that somehow that we don't need borders. But if you look at her new house, there's all kinds of walls and borders. Just to give you some, food for thought, just some irony in this, because, I guess walls and borders only apply to certain people. But otherwise, everybody has to coexist. So just keep that in mind. And let's go to the other images that we were seeing throughout the week with, of course, President Trump and his meeting with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. You can obviously see from their body language that this was a very inviting, welcoming time for those who support President Trump and Israel now. This was a wonderful experience just to see people just enjoy you could see everybody was really relaxed. So just by the body language, we could illustrate that this was a very important moment for both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump, which President Trump also made a historic visit to the Wailing Wall. And there was a couple other things that I think you can take a lot away from this last week. Very significant week. It seems like we've been experiencing very significant events too. I got a phone call from my friend who is on the USS Carlson, and they're ready to come home. They want this mission to be over with. And I think that is really why it is important to discuss also the images I showed you of President Macron and those prime ministers that were kind of snickering. See, the whole point to that speech, President Trump's speech, was that we have been carrying the load for all these nations. We've been paying for it out of our own pockets. And that speech was so significant for so many reasons, and we might discuss a little bit more at the Court of Public Opinion about that. But again, after getting a phone call from top leaders who are on the USS Carlson, they want this over. We have been carrying the load. And I think that is the message, that it's going to be up to these other leaders to clean up their problems. I don't know that that's going to work out the way we hope, but you know what? That is the risk that President Trump, and I believe this meeting the world leaders, is that they're going to have to come up with a plan on how they're going to eliminate the problem. I find it's really important because of the types of meetings that occurred over this week, plus the Manchester attack, and looking at overall, are people going to embrace the changes? Because it doesn't look that's the case. In fact, there's been reports, something you want to pay attention to, because I didn't want to just do this update in body language to point out that you can pick up a lot from the body language. It's hard to kind of always put it into words, but if I had live audio and video, I would be able to do that, but I have to pre-record all this. I think what you need to pay attention to, why we're discussing these events, and I want to get to the end of this because we're going to run out of tape here in a moment. The reason we discussed why it was interesting, because I think it's going to be very telling for what's ahead. Do I think President Trump has gotten support from a lot of the media? I think you'd be surprised how many people support President Trump's meeting with world leaders. I think that more people are willing to look at President Trump in a different light. Some people disagree. They think his behavior was unpresidential. But at the same time, I mean, this is a different arena. And I think that if you have the attitudes and you see the snickering that's been going on, it's no wonder that President Trump has pushed some people out of his way. And I don't know that that's the answer that some people want to hear, But it's not as if President Trump has not been overly criticized. I mean, the very people that argue that President Obama was the better president, I mean, you could take different sides to that. I've seen it happen on both sides of the aisle. Also, I found a report that I find really stunning, and I found this at, let me make sure, USA Politics Today. I'll put the link in the information below if anyone wants to read this article about how much has been missing out of the Social Security Trust. $1 billion. $1 billion. Complete loss. And, you know, the fraud that occurred here is incredible. In about 2011, 2012, Senator Rand Paul they wanted to audit the Fed at that point regarding the Social Security Trust. Well, the final report of this, it turns out that there were people that were authorized Social Security benefits. They did not have payees, and they did not have Social Security cards. This is atrocious, and this is epic for a lot of reasons. But of all the events, and it's hard to pick which one was more significant, the one that was, of course, is most significant is the attack that occurred in Manchester for the obvious reasons. And then the Seth Rich story, which I found really important to elaborate a little bit more in a post I had reported on a day or two ago regarding how Rod Wheeler found interesting connections to the story that was a reoccurring problem, or through interviews or just internal discussion between other detectives and other investigators, that there's just so many different things going on within this story that makes this story even more significant. It seems like the more these people try to cover their tracks, or in the case regarding the Seth Rich story, it just seemed like it becomes more obvious that this is going to go to trial. And it turns out today, as a follow-up, that federal investigators want to go further and pursue the investigation regarding into Seth Rich's murder, because it's controversial, number one, but because of the evidence and the discrepancy of the information. We noticed that this was trending all week, and there has been a lot of mystery behind it. So it's not surprising that story is going to get much more attention, because if you noticed, it just seemed like all the people that were involved in discussing the case, they were all being marginalized. Which brings me to the other report. And earlier today, I had a chance to talk to one of the people that were on that list of the boycott for Sean Hannity. I contacted Hannity because I purchased vehicles there, and I had a discussion with one of the customer service about this very issue. And I'm going to go into it more at the Court of Public Opinion probably over the weekend, but you'll want to stay tuned for that. But overall, this whole disseminating fake news, or there's so many different things that have been happening, so just give me a moment here. But it's all about trying to delegitimize these reports, or in some cases altogether block them out, censorship. So this becomes the reoccurring theme. That's why I did in fact contact some of the people I do business with, and we're talking about large purchases when you're thinking about John Deere, which was on the list, and Hyundai Sonata, which I purchased, and dealing with a company. So I found this very difficult for me to report on, because I couldn't just do it in a few minutes, but I wanted to report about this because obviously you see a lot more is behind this story. It seems as if these stories have grown legs. It's kind of like there's a lot has been put together. And if you really look at some of the things that are going on in each of these stories, these news stories per se, it seems like something's unfolded before our eyes. And it's almost as if the truth has been revealed in a great, it's been powerful. And this is all while President Trump was with Benjamin Netanyahu. That is a prophetic sign of so many, I mean, it's just biblical. And we are coming upon the weekend of Shabbat, according to the Jewish calendar. And they open up the book of Ruth, and there's a lot more to Shabbat. What I found interesting, I found this, I've filtered through it, and I picked this off real quick. And just a comment from one of the people that comment on one of the news stories that this is as if the story of Esther, if you had remembered when Benjamin Netanyahu went before Congress and the events that occurred over the weekend, that this is literally the story of Esther unfolding. Knowing, if you know the whole story, you'll understand this is worth studying and reading. We're going to discuss a lot more about that at the Court of Public Opinion. I just found it very interesting as we wrap this up, all the important stories, and there's something to take away from this and the significance of visiting Israel during the season of redemption, according to the Jewish calendar and the season we're in, for a lot of other reasons. We're going to get into a lot more. I just found it very important to discuss a lot of these news stories because it's as if when you take photography, it says a picture says 1,000 words. Well, I can look at some of the interactions between the world leaders, and there was much to report on, and it was the body language itself that told a whole different story. We're going to discuss a lot more at the Court of Public Opinion coming up this weekend. I hope you all have a nice break and the rest of the week, and we'll see you at the Court of Public Opinion this Sunday. Thanks again.